All right, y'all, welcome to the show. We have huge news today. So, Israel's war cabinet has just officially collapsed. This is something that we saw coming for a while, but now it's actually happening. We'll also get to the fact that we've reached the logical conclusion of all of the genocidal language. Wait until you hear what a former Israeli MP said on the most popular news show in Israel. Even for them, this is above and beyond. And then later on, we'll get to Joe Rogan and Tim Dillon have some pretty shocking comments on Israel in a podcast they did. RFK goes full warmonger on Piers Morgan's show. And Charlemagne versus Bill Maher gets pretty interesting. So we got all that and more on top of it. Everybody do me a big favor. Subscribe to the channel. It helps out massively. It costs you nothing. It makes it so that it spreads through the algorithm a lot better and the videos get more traction. So hook a brother up with a sub if you haven't yet. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So let's start with this here. The Associated Press released an investigation that identified at least 60 Palestinian families that lost at least 25 people in the war between October and December, with nearly a quarter of those families losing more than 50 family members in those weeks, with several families having, quote, no one left to document the tolls. Look, we've heard rumblings about this for a while, where somebody's like, okay, I'm Palestinian, or my family's from Gaza, or what have you, and then you'd hear these just wild numbers coming out, like I lost 18 family members, or whatever it might be. And, you heard so many of these anecdotally, but I understand if people hear that and they think I don't know, man, that seems a little much. Are we sure that that's the case? Well, now, again, here you have a Western media outlet, the Associated Press, and usually the Western media outlets are biased in favor of Israel and against Palestinians. They have identified at least 60 Palestinian families that lost at least 25 people. So, in other words, further evidence added to the list for the ICJ case brought by South Africa, but what does this sound like to you? What does this sound like to you? All right, let's continue here. So, this is in Haaretz. In a single hour, Israeli snipers killed 7 bystanders at the Jenin refugee camp. So, for those of you that don't know, again, we're talking about the West Bank here. We're not talking about Gaza. And the line coming from the Israeli government this whole time is that you don't understand. We're going after Hamas. We're doing a defensive war because of October 7th. Hamas is our only target. Don't look at the fact we've killed 92% innocent civilians. We're trying to get Hamas because we have pure intentions. Really? Then why has violence in the West Bank skyrocketed? And why are we always getting headlines like this? Israeli snipers killed 7 bystanders at the Jenin refugee camp in a single hour. 1 hour. Stop and think about this. How many nightmare stories are we not getting just because it doesn't happen to get to the media, right? Imagine what day-to-day life is like, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where mission creep is the most obvious thing in the world in terms of Israel taking more territory and trying to do more illegal settlements. There was another story about a bunch of Palestinian shepherds who were assaulted by illegal Israeli settlers. And again, a day doesn't go by that we don't get a horrific, nightmare-like story coming out of both Gaza and the West Bank. All right, but I haven't even gotten to the main events yet, man. So look at this. So this is Israel's most watched news show. And here you have a former Likud MP, Moshe Phelan. Now, by the way, let me point out, Likud is certainly a right-wing party. It's actually not the furthest right party in Israel. I need you to digest what that fact means as you hear the rest of this. So this guy goes on Israel's most watched news show, and he invokes Hitler to justify Gaza resettlement. Now, he speaks in Hebrew, but, quote, this is the quote here. As Hitler said, I cannot live if one Jew is left. We can't live here if one Islamo-Nazi remains. So he's citing Hitler as some sort of an inspiration for his preferred policy in Gaza. So just like Hitler said, he can't live if one Jew is left. Well, we can't live if one more Islamo-Nazi remains. Well, who do you consider a, quote, Islamo-Nazi? The Steelman version is, oh, he's just talking about Hamas. Really? You think? Is that your interpretation of this? No. The fact of the matter is he's referring to Palestinians. He's referring to Palestinians in Gaza. This is what he's saying. And he's favorably citing Hitler. I mean, again, this is the logical conclusion, the logical endpoint of all of the previous genocidal language. I played it for you at the very last show, I think, that we did, or maybe 2 shows ago. I played for you the compilation of the most genocidal comments. And it's a very long video. They say, ooh, sorry, I kicked the camera here. They say a lot of things. But even putting aside just the language, as we've always brought up, when you look at the total siege, that's enough to be able to determine their intent here. If you do a total siege and you cut off food, fuel, and water and electricity, doesn't much matter if you guys come out and say, hey, you're all guilty or not, because the policy is you guys are all guilty, right? But in this instance, it's a very rare instance where we happen to have about 38 different comments that are genocidal from Israeli government officials and IDF officials, and also the policy to back it up. So, look, I mean, that ICJ case, it's as slam dunk of a case as you could possibly get if you're looking at the evidence objectively. But now, let's get to the biggest political change here. Israel's Netanyahu dissolves war cabinet. Decision follows resignation of centrist Benny Gantz, however you say it, and will disappoint hardliners angling to expand influence on war in Gaza. So look, when I read that headline, my first thought was, that doesn't make any sense, because with Gantz resigning, that means that the far right gets more power because they're still in the war cabinet, right? So that was my first instinct, is like the centrist resigns, the cabinet is only further right wing now. But as you already saw through the headline, what they're saying here is Netanyahu is like, well, we're just not going to have the war cabinet anymore. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced the end of Israel's 6-member war cabinet. Reports on Monday said the Israeli leader had announced the decision at a meeting of the political security cabinet the previous evening. Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners have been pushing for a new war cabinet to be established after the more centrist Benny Gantz quit the emergency government. Nationalist religious finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, he's super genocidal, and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, you already know he's super genocidal, who have demanded Israel must continue its bombardment of Gaza despite calls for some restraint from allies, including the U.S., had called for a new war cabinet to be formed featuring coalition party leaders. However, Netanyahu has reportedly turned them down. Quote, the cabinet was in a coalition agreement with Gantz at his request. As soon as Gantz left, there's no need for a cabinet anymore, Netanyahu said, according to a report in the Jerusalem Post. The Israeli premier is now expected to hold consultations about the Gaza war with a small group of ministers, including Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, super genocidal, and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, who had been in the war cabinet. So they go on to, give some more specifics about the way decisions are going to be made from here on out. But this is actually very interesting, because again, my instinct was, well, if Gantz steps aside, there are no moderating influences in the cabinet, let's be clear, but the relative moderating influence is gone. Now everybody who's in there is an official far right-wing psycho. But Netanyahu is dissolving the cabinet. Now, what does that mean? What that means is Netanyahu has sufficiently felt the international pressure and the U.S. pressure where he knows he's signing his political death warrant if he stays in a war cabinet with just Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the super far-right psychos who are just begging for an out-and-out genocide where you don't even try to do the PR bullshit ass covering, right? And he knows there would be consequences internationally, probably from the U.S. Doing some sort of move to temper what Israel's doing, but more importantly, more broadly, from the international community, which we've already seen a bunch of steps in the direction of, like, Colombia cutting off all the coal to Israel, and that's their number one coal exporter. And other countries saying, hey, we're done with trade with you. So I think Netanyahu knows if he stays in that cabinet with those super far right-wing psychos, that it's more likely there will be more international consequences. So he's dissolving the cabinet. Now, by the way, does that mean, they're going to stop what they're doing? No. Does that mean that all of a sudden they're going to, let's do a Palestinian state? Of course not. No. But he's trying to manage the optics while continuing the policy behind the scenes. Right? And there's no hope in managing the optics in any way, shape, or form if whatever moderating influences there were are now out of the cabinet and you're in there with a bunch of people who end the day by saying Heil Hitler, right? So that's basically the reality of the situation now. I don't think the policy is going to change, But I found it interesting because I didn't expect Netanyahu to even go through this, this optics thing. I really did expect him to continue with just the war cabinet as it was. And so, if anything, that shows me perhaps the international pressure is more important than I previously thought. I thought, as of right now, they don't care at all, right? But if enough countries break up with Israel effectively, then they will start caring because they have to. No, apparently they're already feeling that pressure, right? And I'm very curious what the back channel is like with the United States, because very publicly, the United States is totally, no matter what Israel does, it's, oh my God, we love you. Oh, you're special. Oh my God, your poopy doesn't stink. That's what the policy actually is. But there's a sense here of like maybe actually behind the scenes, there's some people involved in this process of diplomacy with Israel where there is more pressure being exerted than we can see, right? Because again, or else I would just imagine Netanyahu stays in the war cabinet, keeps listening to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and ramps up the genocide tenfold. So anyway, we'll see what happens with this moving forward. Remember, Netanyahu, massively corrupt, incredibly far-right-wing, super genocidal, but also one of the traits that perfectly describes him to this point in his career is he's always a survivor, right? He's always a survivor. That's why he's been on top for so long. And so what he's doing here, again, is an attempt at political survival to save his own ass, but at the same time, that's also probably why he's going to keep the war going as long as humanly possible, because he knows as soon as it's over, his ass is gonzo. So we'll see what happens, but there's your updates on Israel. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.